Gentlemen, are you ready?
Ready.
All
You want
right.
to read us the question, we'll figure out who's going to answer, and then you go.
Yeah. All right. So the first question, common question. What is the path that needs to be taken to get into the competition MMA training at Crazy 88? And do I have to deviate away from my Jiu-Jitsu training and sacrifice my BJJ competition schedule?
Do you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
Just
I'll come
speak
in.
loudly.
Go ahead.
I would say the most important thing to getting started with MMA is to set a consistent schedule. I would say a minimum of training in both styles of striking and grappling at least 4 times a week. You're not going to be able to be successful working your way towards a competition team on a super light schedule. You're not going to be able to once or twice a week your way into it. Assume that if it's something that you want to get into, that there's a lot to take in with that, not only skill-wise, but also the risks that come with trying to be competitive in any combat sport, let alone MMA, where there's a lot of weapons, small gloves, and the best way to prepare for that is a very high output, high intensity, training schedule, as well. John.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. That's a great, you can definitely take that approach, cast a big net and just get a lot of training in across the board. I would say that suits somebody who really doesn't, have a preference in any one particular style. A different way that I think you can approach this is to figure out what martial art do you gravitate towards more. As an MMA fighter, like Sebastian said, there's so many different weapons and things that you can do. So with that being said, you're going to gravitate kind of more towards the striking elements of MMA or more towards the grappling elements. So if you're a grappler, I would say that you should start to get in the great graces of the coaches and the grappling side of things. Make sure you're really focusing in on your grappling training and doing the gi, doing the no gi, doing the competitions. You should be having mat chats with the coaches, Master Julius. You have to work yourself. If you're not already in the circle or you're in the advanced classes or getting close to there, that's your first step, is working to where the folks in the advanced class and the black belt competitors and stuff start to take notice of you. And there's all different ways to do that, but training hard and being super fanatical about your training is a really easy way. You don't even have to be good. You have a question?
Yeah, no, I just want to clarify because I feel like we can get really deep into it, and I
Yeah.
think that's what the person wants. So just to go back to you, Sebastian, you said that the minimum is 4 days a week, right? What's the preference? Let's say a guy comes to you and says, I got nothing to do. I just want to become a fighter as soon as possible. I'm willing to put everything I got into it. What's the training schedule you put him on?
When we have young guys come in, tell me, this is all I want to do. I'll build, I'll set my work schedule around this. I don't have any other responsibilities. I'm telling them, you need to be in here so much that I'm trying to charge you rent. I need to be kicking you out of the gym, because the reality of this is, like I was saying, it's not just, a competitive sport, but it's also a pretty dangerous one. So you need to be training so much that, you're rounding out all those edges, and that you don't want to leave any stone unturned. You need to be training constantly.
Yeah,
if this is really what you want, the other guy is, everybody else that's serious about this is working super hard, and if you're lackadaisical about it, it's just not going to get you where you want to go. So you need to be committed from the jump if that's what you're really serious about.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it like it's going to be your dream job, and you're in an internship training to get ready for that position. So that being said, minimum 5 days a week. You got to at least be able to punch the clock Monday through Friday, at least once a day. And if you can truly integrate that into your schedule and maintain that consistently, then you can start to add on from there. We can start to even focus and specialize and program your training, as needed. But I've heard that's what Master Julius just said so many times over the last 12 years. Guys that come in and people, girls too, that come in and say that you know they're finally in this unique life situation where they can train all the time, and then they're 0 to 60 right out of the gate, training all the time. And then, you know, 3 weeks goes by and something happened. You know, their dog got sick or they have a hangnail, and you don't see them anymore. So it's super important to not like pause life and then train, and then all of a sudden, you know, life starts trickling back in, and then you can't train anymore. So you got to do it both. But if you're being serious, you got to do at least 5 days a week.
Yeah.
How many hours per day?
I would say that, you know, no more than 2 hours. You know, you like, you know, the hour and a half long, or anything from an hour to an hour and a half, whatever's available to you. I would say to do in our classes are usually either an hour or an hour and a half. That's pretty much the sweet spot.
Especially early on. It's easy to, you know, like I said, you know, you want to be in here so much, you know, you want to be in here and in the coach's face that, you know, they start to recognize you, they start to see you working hard. You never want it to be a situation as far as like trying to get into a fight or get onto the team where you're like asking the coach, you know, obviously good, yeah, you should ask the coaches, you know, let us know, but really the way it should be is that you're here so much that we're like, hey, you know, I've seen you around every single day, you know, what are your plans, what are your goals?
If you're truly feeling that strongly, where you're like, I actually need to let them know that I'm serious about this, and I kind of want to put that on myself, just so I can, you know, continue this. Do that. You know, be vocal about it. I think a lot of the questions we get, you know, you'll find that a lot of these answers will come naturally as you engage in conversations with your coaches. Also, I believe this part of this question was, will it affect their competition, their BJJ training schedule and competition schedule, right? So like, you know, that is a good question. I come from this, I was cut from a very similar cloth. I came into Crazy 88 with the intentions of being UFC champion. And at the time, we didn't have a striking program here. So I had to, you know, Master Joyce goes, well, like, you know, you're not that great of a wrestler. So, like, let's really get your grappling super good before we do anything else. So for, like, a really long time, I focused on that, traveled around the world. I fought some, you know, super notable people. I had, like, great success to the point where I was falling in love with it, to where when it was time for me to go to Thailand and like stop grappling training for a little bit, I was going through something. You know, I really was like, wait, what do you mean I can't, you know, like, and I had to have a talk with Master Joyce. He was like, look, you know, remember the original goal, you know? So if the original goal is still that, and when I thought about it, it was, I felt like I had that fire to go do what I set out to do, and that was fight. But I really came to that crossroads. I fell in love with grappling so much that I come to crossroads. Sound like this person is afraid they might be coming up against. You're going to have to know that there's going to be a time where you're no longer a person that's, you know, focused on your jiu-jitsu training and your jiu-jitsu competitions and stuff like that. Your training will focus on like rest, recovery, strength and conditioning, boxing, kickboxing, MMA, grappling, jiu-jitsu still, but just really spending your next chapter of figuring out how all these things plug together. You're going to have to really, you will take away from your jiu-jitsu competition, your jiu-jitsu training time, but it will be to further, you know, your career of fighting. And that's based off of this question. I got to assume that this person wants to be a fighter more than they want to be a jiu-jitsu person. If you might come to that crossroads and be like, you know what, fuck it, I'm riding this out. I want to become a black belt world champion, because I was on the path to become like, to at least bang it out with those guys and stuff like that. So I really had to be like, well, you know, what do I want to do? Because I'm like hook, line, and sinker in love with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now. And I still am till this very day. But, I mean, it was super hard to pull myself out of it. But that's essentially what you have to do when you're building up a base and a skill set. That's why I say, like, it's either going to be striking or grappling. So go in, introduce yourself to the coach. I'm reporting for duty. And let's go. And then you'll know when it's time to start to transition, and it's probably going to be at a time when you really start to hit a big stride in jiu-jitsu. So keep that in mind. It's something to think about. And
if I may, I don't want to counter what John is saying, because he's absolutely right. But one thing to consider, and this is just from my perspective as a striking coach, is I would say a lot of times when people come to me being like, hey, I want to be into MMA, one of the most common things that I hear is like, I want to be a striker. To stop right. Especially at the early levels of amateur MMA, if you can't grapple, and somebody who's even a high school wrestler, that's it. But the one thing that jiu-jitsu offers that striking doesn't, that is extremely important, is that with grappling, you can be on a very consistent competitive schedule. You can compete in grappling every other weekend if you want to, and, you know, you can compete 4, 5, 6 times in a day sometimes. And that amount of experience and that number of times stepping up to the plate as a competitor is so valuable as a competitor. And the other thing is that, even if you are fighting kickboxing, you are fighting MMA, you can only do that once every other month if you're really on it,
Yeah.
But with jiu-jitsu, you can, in grappling, you can compete so regularly. So I would advise that, you use grappling as a way to build a lot of experience, and again, that, a lot of guys are like, I want to be a striker. Please do not overlook the grappling skill sets. They are so important to building a foundational MMA system, because if you can't, you're pretty much screwed.
Do you think that, can you talk about your opinions on the importance of relative skill sets as people progress through the different tiers of MMA? Because you were talking about the importance of grappling, but you don't see a lot of grappling exchanges as much once you get to the title fights in UFC. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, both of these skill sets take years and decades to master at an effective level. What I would say in my experience is that at the earlier levels, grappling is, I don't want to say more important, but it is. I don't know.
The X factor.
The grappling is harder to overcome early on because you don't have to be.
Better grappler usually wins at the lower levels.
And then striking ends up becoming a little bit more important as you go. But again, that's such a hard generalization to make, because if you're good at one or the other, you can be great at any level. But I would say generally, if I see somebody who's like, I've been grappling for 2 years, and then a guy who's like, I've been striking for 2 years, and you put them in an MMA fight, the grappler's going to win early on.
This is something I started to notice as I started to pay attention closer and closer to the bigger fight promotions and being around it in general, just seeing how guys fight. I would say that, initially, there's an old saying, the more you know, the less you do. So that's why when you see two really good high-level fighters, it's like this closely contested match where there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. It's because both guys have a whole lot of tools in their tool belt, but they're really being precise on which tool they're going to use and at which time. And when you have two guys doing that, it can look like there's not a whole lot going on. But I would also say that at that high level, like a guy like an Israel Adesanya, a guy who just came up in striking, who had very little grappling experience or competition, or but he made it work for him. He figured out the parts of the grappling that he needed to incorporate in his game, and he can deploy that game plan that he has for grappling very effectively against the highest level guys. So I would say that the higher levels you go, you get guys that are more willing and coaches that are more willing to work with fighters and to tailor make whatever it is that they're going to learn to go directly into their game. So you can have that. So that's kind of why I was like, if you're a person, the person who was asking the question, it sounded like they were like, they were falling in love with their martial art, and they wanted to know that when it start to mix everything together to really truly prepare for MMA, are you going to be leaving your martial art a little bit? And the answer is yes.
Justin, I just looked up Israel Adesanya's record. He has 32 amateur kickboxing fights, 80 professional kickboxing fights.
I was gonna say, I think he's something like 75-2 or something like
Right.
that as pro kickboxer.
Right, and
that's a lot of years of professional kickboxing. And it takes up, when you look at a guy like
Absolutely.
Adesanya, you're like, man, look how slick he is. That's a
He's been doing
decade
this
of
since little kid.
professional kickboxing at the highest level to be that effective in MMA.
So that's a great point, and I've been hogging the mic big time. But I'm just going to say, yeah, if you're not in that, so another life situation is going to be a huge factor in all this. If you're running out of time is something you will never get back. That's why we pay. That's why we really focus on our market, to let people know we're here, we're legit, and we want you to come train here if you're fucking serious. Because if you don't, and you lose 2-3 years at a place, you will never ever get that back, and it becomes so detrimental. So figure out where you are at in life. Do you have the time to delve into something, or do you need to hit it more broadly and become more of not like a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. I really don't like that saying, but it's actually really relevant when you're talking about preparing for MMA. You do not have to be an expert in any given one thing in MMA to be a high level MMA fighter.
let me ask you a question to get your opinion on it, because I think people don't sometimes underestimate this. How important is the different skill sets versus how important is the level that you reached in the skill set. So you often get people who are like, oh, well, I did boxing for 2 years, and then I did Muay Thai for 2 years, and then I did Jiu-Jitsu for 2 years, versus a guy who wrestled since he's 6 and never boxed or never kickboxed. And the irony is that most coaches prefer the guy who never kickboxed but wrestled his whole life. Do you agree? Talk a little bit about why that is.
I would say typically, I would err on the side of the guy who spent a lot of time in one thing and kind of perfected that, because I know that he can replicate that now. He's going to be able to learn 80% of the things now 20% faster, because he's been able to go through similar systems and all the skill acquisitions and everything like that, where if you're just exposing yourself on it, like on a very cursory level, on a very shallow beginner, like very surface level, you're not going to really, that person is just not going to have the chops that the other guy does, typically speaking.
The ability to gain mastery in any skill, be it a martial art, any sort of education, the mental wherewithal, the focus, and the lessons that you learn with gaining mastery through any skill, it's not just about that specific skill you learn. There is a skill in being able to master something. So if you're telling me that you've got a guy who is, let's say, the most common one that we see as coaches, that coaches will get excited about, is like a guy who's wrestled his entire life. I know that person has not only mastered the skill of wrestling, but has also mastered self-discipline, focus. They've learned how to study, and they've mastered skill acquisition. So I know that person is going to be able to take what I feed them, and they're going to be able to learn it faster. Like John said, you're going to learn 80% of the stuff in 20% of the time. And I know that person has taught themselves how to be disciplined.
Yeah, after you come up in a martial arts system and you reach a mastery level, you can really apply that whole process in that journey to like literally anything else in life. Just a new career or whatever. It's very, very similar. So
it's followed by a pattern of behaviors, not just in that skill set itself.
Okay. When can a student have their first fight? So when can I have my first fight? What are you guys looking for? Be as specific as possible.
For if you're talking about, generally the first thing that we do with people is we're going to put them, well, I would say competitively, if you're training in all the styles, the first thing you should do if you're spending your time wisely is Jiu-Jitsu competition. Jiu-Jitsu competition is not any easier than MMA or striking competition, but I would say it is a little less
risky. You
less
don't get
risky.
injured.
Way less risky.
It's less risky, and
you can do it every weekend.
You can do it more. So that should be the first thing, and you can do it at a lower level, because in striking it's very difficult to start sparring in a couple of months, but in jiu-jitsu, as long as you're not reckless, you can be sparring in jiu-jitsu in a couple weeks. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Day one.
Listen,
Sure.
absolutely.
Very
I did
quickly.
a tournament before I had any formal training, so it's like you can really throw yourself in at jiu-jitsu and get that competition experience and desensitize yourself to what it's like to show up to a venue and wait and weigh in and have that anxiety just hanging over your head.
That the mental pressure that
Yes.
comes with competition, which is why earlier I was saying about like grappling being able to desensitize you to compete so often. That is huge.
For sure.
Yeah. Look, a guy like Matt Hicks told me that he has like 1,000 matches wrestling.
Yeah.
You're never gonna get I don't know. I don't know. Can a boxer get 1,000 matches? Impossible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, kickboxing in America? No way.
It would be even in Thailand. The guys with the biggest records. There's no amateur, so whatever you see a Thai's record is, that's their record.
Yeah.
If the 300 fights, that's pretty big, and that's over a lifetime. Boxing, I think Vasyl Lomachenko, I think, had just under 400 amateur fights before he turned pro. He's been doing it since he was
That's
a
why
young child.
he got 9 fights or something, and he's in these big fights because he's got all that history behind it. So it's going to be a little bit dependent on the individual in terms of when you can get your first fight, but I think that a good rule of thumb is that you've already done some grappling tournaments, and whether it be at the blue belt level or you're placing and winning there, or at like a a no-gi advanced level or intermediate. I forgot. I think at one point we were discussing, kicking around some criteria for what it could be, but I mean, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for like blue belt level, intermediate to advanced level no-gi, or blue belt level gi, and then you definitely have to get a smoker fight. You absolutely have to get that.
I mean, generally
once you start training your strike.
Generally, the standard is like actively competing as a jiu-jitsu blue belt, competent in wrestling. I mean, it's hard. There's not like often common wrestling tournaments that we can put you in and belt you by that. But you need to be competent in that skill set as well. And then for most people, I mean, the bare minimum is going to be a smoker for kickboxing. That's the bare minimum. But most people, if you've got the time, let's say you're 18, 19, and you're like, hey, I want to be a fighter. I'm going to put you through 2 smokers. I'm going to put you through 3 or 4 kickboxing fights. And if you've been doing jiu-jitsu the whole time, then, in maybe 2 years from the start, then you can start looking at an MMA fight. But again, it's dangerous, and it's not something that we really put people into lightly. But as far as smokers go, if you're talking about a fight as far as like getting in the ring, if you're really consistent, I've had some people do it in about a year. But those people were very consistent, and they focused, and they did what I told them to do. Also, to the contrary of that, some people kind of come in once or twice a week, and then they'll ask me, Coach, when I can fight. And if the point of this Q&A is to answer questions, the answer is if you're not training consistently enough, the answer is never. There will never come a time if you're not consistent enough.
The worst thing ever is being out there in a fight and being so tired you can't lift your arms.
And just so you know, training twice a week for 2 years does not equal you the same amount of experience and skill development as training 4 or 5 times a week for 1 year. That's not, those two things don't, even though it's like it ends up at the same number of training sessions, that it's not the same thing as far as the amount of commitment and the amount of conditioning to prepare you for that.
There's an old thing, it's like 10,000 hours of focused practice or 10 years worth of focused practice is equivalent to like what it takes to gain mastery in a given thing. So like just know that there's going to be people out there that are trying to squeeze their 10 years of mastery into like 3 and 4, so they're just doing a whole lot of stuff, so you just got to be ready for that. Even if you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to dabble in here. We've had guys dabble in MMA here before and broke their orbital and went into cardiac arrest, and they had to go to their government job on that Monday. So
there's no playing.
He's alive. Just to clarify, he's alive.
And well.
He is alive.
Super
But there are
But it's
consequences.
scary. It is just so scary. You want to give yourself the best chances possible. Like the only thing that you can constrain is like how much you put into your bucket. Like if you look at yourself like a bucket, and like what you put in is work and stuff to help you with your conditioning and just like preparation. The only thing you can control, you can't. There's so many different variables and factors that can swoop in and derail things, but there's like very few things you can control. It's like how many times a week you show up to the gym ready to go, and if you do want to fight, then you should be saying, hey, how do I get a fight? I want to fight, because Sebastian is a motivator. He got a lot of yellow energy. I'm not a motivator. I don't want to mess with you. I don't want you to fight unless you truly want to fight. Like you got a burning desire. Like you're not kind of like, hey, do you think I should fight? It's like, hey, I need to fight. Tell me how to do this.
If you're not 100% sure in that situation, it's so dangerous. Mm-hmm. It can be real. It can be a real risk to be half in, half out in this sport.
And if you're unsure, just train your ass off. Get in the best shape as possible. See if you can do it. 6 months. See, can I do that?
You can always train like you're preparing for a fight and put yourself through that test of dealing with having to die, not necessarily make weight cuts, but dealing with have to die and have to show up to training and not actually have a fight and see how you deal with those things. If you're curious, like I wonder if I have the chops, you can go through a camp and see if you can deal with the camp.
Yeah, don't even worry about the weight. So many people are worried about the weight before they have any fight. Like, what do you think I can fight at? Meanwhile, the person's 40 pounds overweight, so you got to get yourself into super good shape and just give yourself a shot at that, especially if you're coming from no background. You're like, well, fuck it, I'm going to garbage man to world champion. I can do it. And you can. It's not impossible. This is a crazy sport. Crazier things have happened. But
that's a very common question that I get is like, what weight, coach, do you think I should cut 20 pounds? Stop. First off, you have, 6 to 8 weeks to prepare for a fight, all right? If you're spending the last 3 to 4 of those worrying about making weight, that means half of your camp is spent dehydrated, tired, and you're not getting the proper reps. If you are like, I think I can fight at a lower weight, cool. Down the road, deal with that. But for all of my amateurs, I'm telling them, like, hey, as low of a weight cut as possible to fight at a reasonable class, because you should be focusing your time spending on skill development. And if you're worried all of your energy and stressing about, am I going to make that extra weight cut? I'm sorry, you're not focusing on the fight, you're not focusing on skill development, and those last several weeks you're spent getting tired, exhausted reps, and you're not going to be fast, you're not going to pop, you're not going to feel good.
Yeah.
How does your recommendation change for individuals who are not trying to make fighting a career, but the people who are like, I just want to do a fight?
How has our
Well, all the things that you recommended are in answering the question, when can I get my first fight? So I'm saying, does the answers that you've provided change if the person's not trying to make it a career, but just wants to like bucket list a cage fight?
I would say that my advice would definitely change for that. Not so much as like, okay, well then you don't have to be as serious or anything like that, but you're going to be able to kind of like, like come up with some like a good checklist of things that you need, and if you're doing it for a long term, then like there's a lot of like organic things that have to happen in there and connections that need to be made. But if you're just like, hey, this is my bucket list, what I want to do is I'm gonna do one fight, I want to do as serious as possible, tell me what I can do. It's at least a little easier to just like make a generic thing to follow, but again, that's kind of one-off things that I'm not a super big fan of that type of stuff, but I think it does have its place, and like it can be done safely.
I'm, not to be too contradictory, I actually, like, I've had plenty of people come to me that are, I don't want to like classify by age or anything like that, but I've had plenty of people come to me that are probably traditionally outside of the age range of trying to be a long-term competitive fighter, and I'm a fan of people that are maybe a little further along in their life or have a very professional position in life with their job and have a family. I think it's actually super cool when people are like, hey, I want to do a smoker fight. I want to do something like this. I'm actually all for that. However, there is still a bare minimum of training required, and there's still a standard to be met, and almost more careful because, as you get older, as you're committing less, it can even be more dangerous, and there's more at risk when when you're in those positions. But I actually am always willing to talk to people, if people are, kind of out of that traditional prime age range or lifestyle. That's fine. If that's something you want to do, please don't think that coming to me and being like, Coach, I'm 40, there's no way I could ever fight. Talk to me, because there's a lot of other people out there that feel in your position. We've absolutely been able to found age-appropriate, skill-appropriate matches. However, there is still going to be that minimum training requirement, but I love it. I love the idea that competitive martial arts can be for everybody to some extent or another.
I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, so that's where I'm coming from. I think that you should, if you really have that fire in you, you can itch that scratch in jiu-jitsu. That's what I believe. The strength coaches are crazy. So, but I'm not saying that I'm against it by any means. I'm just saying like we're gonna have a heart-to-heart if you're coming to me and you're never did anything before you're 40.
Going to be consideration.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about it.
We're gonna have to figure out what's going on here.
So in general, to clarify, for MMA, you're looking for blue and blue, essentially blue shirt or blue belt with some wrestling in there. Striking smoker fight. Probably had to have competed in grappling.
Yeah, handful of grappling tournaments.
Definitely head-to-head.
Smoker fights.
If you come to me and you tell me, I'm not the grappling coach, but if you come to me and you tell me, yeah, I did some kickboxing fights, I want to transition to MMA, but I haven't spent any time on grappling, absolutely not. There's no way I'll even consider it.
Okay. And for the grappling-based fighters, we have this is a really good place to be if you want to be that. But the thing is, for MMA though, you're gonna have to spend some time, in that. So like if you're a person coming over from jiu-jitsu and you're used to the high level over there, remember your goal for the striking is now to get to a smoker level and get ready to go through a few of those, and then maybe even an amateur fight in striking, just so you have that equivalent experience in the striking that's not in MMA. So that when you are in MMA and there's punches and kicks that you can throw, you're ready for that. You're game for that, and the distancing and the timing and stuff like that, so you can really use your grappling. You don't want to get in there as a grappler and then all of a sudden be shooting from 10 feet away because you've never been hit before. So
balancing that is really hard because I was thinking about when you guys were talking, because we're saying that we want you to do one style until you become a master of it, or very, very
Good,
high
yeah,
level in it,
competent.
and then you run into all that emotional difficulty of when you have to switch styles, and then you're like, well, I was really good at jiu-jitsu,
Yeah.
now I'm over here learning how to throw a jab and keep my hands up.
Listen, to Coach John's point, if you're like, I am a jiu-jitsu guy, I'm a back take specialist, great. You're still striking 4 times a week minimum. That's fine. But if you're like, I'm going to be a specialist, cool. Train your grappling, train 6 days a week in your grappling. That doesn't mean that you ignore another skill set. There has to be a balance there. Damian Maia can box a little bit.
Right. No, I'm talking about in the development stage. One of the things is that we're saying from a development standpoint, it's cool to have a person like get his 300 wrestling matches in, get his 500 wrestling. That's what we want, right? But then the challenge that guy faces is that now he has to go be a beginner
Yeah, he's gonna have
in
to
something.
be up by people that typically probably has no business beating that person up
Yeah.
because they're kind of going back to that beginner level. But it's so needed, and it will help you in the long run with your MMA game. It really will. And if you're ever having problems with this and want to talk to somebody, I'm a good shoulder to lean on because I went through a lot of this type of stuff as I was transitioning.
When was the last time you were a white belt in either sport? 10 years. If I may, from personal experience, I was a white belt in jiu-jitsu until a year ago, like a true white belt, like for real. Like I didn't know what I was doing, and I'm still so fresh to it. But having to come in, not only being a high-level striker, but being the head of a striking program, and then having to come over and be like, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
People
Most people would have done that.
people that I would be coaching in my class on Wednesday, and then Thursday I go over to the jiu-jitsu and they're kicking the crap out of me in the gi. It's super humbling, but
That's a ballsy move, man. I don't know if I ever
but-
told you that. That's a super ballsy
I'm going to
move.
tell you right, everybody who's watching, just know that is a
Yes,
extremely
all
ballsy
the
move.
coaches said that's a super
And
ballsy move.
I don't think a lot of
you
people
hear the cliche all the time of like remaining a white belt, and honest to God, it's the best thing I did because I had to become super humble because in what other situation for a guy like me? I'm 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, been training martial arts for 12 years. In what other situation are there girls 80 pounds lighter than me kicking the crap out of me? Like it's the best thing you can do for yourself, and the best thing you can do as a martial artist is learn to become humble, because I don't care who you are, there will be losses along the way.
Oh, yeah.
There will be difficulties. There's going to be times where you get the crap kicked out of you in the room, and if you can't handle days where you get beat up in the room and you're off and you're slow and you're hurt and you're tired and it's the end of if you can't handle getting whooped and walk away from there with a smile knowing that whooping was a positive experience in the long run, you're not going to cut it. You're not going to be able to deal with losses in fights. You're not going to be able to deal with the real hard stuff. So go into it knowing that it's okay to get your butt kicked. It's okay to lose, and it's okay to be a white belt at something. It's okay, and you should be. Chase that feeling.
Cool. Well, I think we should just end there because he very eloquently stated that.
Hold on, there's one more thing that I want to add. Remember we were talking in the car the other day about these questions? And you were like, what are the most common things that you get asked? All right. Cut 'em.
We don't have it. That's for the next Q&A, man.
All right,
You
all right.
already been talking for 35 minutes.
I've been talking for like